Some of the stigma attached to the public service is that it's overloaded and mismanaged. And public servants over the years have been accused of having developed a lazy and unproductive work ethic. The union responds by saying that the public servants are misunderstood, abused and hard done by. So what's it to be in 1993? Concessions, retrenchment or brute force? The government spends 32% of its budget on public servant salaries.
So that we're talking about $3 billion in a budget this year of about $7 billion.
And public servants are still owed some $2 billion.
Abuse. In a sense, we have had our pockets picked by the removal of, at one time, of 10% in the COLA and the stopping of the merit increases. We had to go to court to get back our property, and we're still fighting to retrieve the arrears.
The civil service took a 10% cut in salary for a period and had it reinstated. The private sector, many of them lost their jobs totally. Whole businesses went under, right? What happened to all those people? Nobody begged for them and said that, they have families to maintain. Sure, they have families to maintain, but somebody's got to get out there and do something productive.
Although union leader and ministers say current relations are amiable, the bomb left by the late Dr. Kendrick Rennie is far from being diffused. Brute force in 1993. It was no joke. The statement was made after the country had a taste of it and was deprived of water for several days.
From time any kind of industrial action starts, there's somebody to say this section of the community is being held to ransom, and this section of the how can you avoid that? How can you avoid deprivation if industrial action means withdrawing either your enthusiasm or your service or whatever? How is it possible for nobody to suffer?
On brute force, Minister Draper told me, we will have to wait and see. I don't want to second-guess anything. But the chamber is not so reticent.
If the government can give in, it means the government has money to give in with. It is my belief that the government does not have any money to give in with, so the government cannot give in. What happens then? One has to realize that production must go on if we are all to live. I keep on getting back to this bottom line that you have got to produce to live.
The government says simply that the CPO team is currently negotiating with the unions, and this is progressing well. But the union wants its debt to take priority over external debts.
That kind of external direction is an iniquitous thing. It's something that we can't sit and be happy with.
We heard the cries of, don't pay the foreign debt. That's a nonsense, because the moment you don't pay your foreign debt, you're going to be cut off at the knees and left as a small floating island without credit rating, without even your ability to purchase anything other than a bartering arrangement.
We are exploring everything. We are using every means available to us to achieve our goals. We are negotiating. It has turned out to be a very frustrating exercise because our hands are above the table and we argue in good faith, and we have a sense that we are being strung along.
Well, what are we left with? We're left with
having to reduce the cost of our civil service. They've got to do that. I don't know how they're going to do it, but they've got to do it.
In the interim, if the civil servants decide they're not going to give in...
Shut the country down then. And let's see what happens to us then.
If it came to the point where everything failed and we were satisfied that something else, some other level of protest was required, it would be irresponsible if we didn't take it.
The civil service still won't get the money, or any other union who wants to ask for it. The managements won't have any more money. The government won't have any more money. Nobody will have any more money. And we'll be starting from scratch, but that much worse off.
But what is clear is that the late Dr. Kendrick Rennie's now famous phrase, brute force, will come into play if the public servants' debts are not dealt with. Mathur, TV6 News, with a special report. The announcement by the government that workers are to be retrenched in the utilities did not come as that much of a surprise for at least one union leader, who told me early last week that he suspected that these were the signals that the government was sending out.
When you look at the estimates, the allocations to different places, you see that there's a danger of retrenchment.
The move to retrench has simply reinforced the view that a newly efficient, streamlined and trimmed public sector is now inevitable.
We too see the need for development, for growth, for reform and change.
External debt conditionalities forced retrenchment in the utilities. As far as the rest of the public service is concerned, Draper's team is still counting heads.
When all this is done, when all is said and done, you may find that in fact there are too many people. But then you may not need to have to retrench.
Well, for years we have complained about the public service being too large, too bloated, too highly paid, too inefficient.
All sides, including the reform team, agree that the public service has not allowed managers to manage, either to motivate, train or to discipline. Also, Demas says many high-ranking public servants do not deserve to be where they are.
Replace what I consider the nonsensical staff report forms that you have at the moment and have had for decades, with questions like, is the employee affable? I mean, what does that mean? That if you go and smile at your boss and laugh at the boss's jokes, the boss will give you a good mark, and so you go up the ladder. And as Mary Wilson England is said to have said about David Frost, you rise without trace.
Demas suggests that politicians themselves are generally hostile to decentralization for fear of losing power in their ministries, and says Dr. Williams was an example.
So he therefore was dealing with this small gang. And these people suddenly found themselves out in space, out in limbo. And that sent a very powerful message to the rest of the public service, that perhaps you better not take initiatives.
He adds that the Constitution itself is against the sharing of power and responsibility in the public service.
If constitutionally a permanent secretary is responsible only for supervision, then he has the constitutional right not to manage. Now this is absurd, because on the one hand you're saying that the public servant, or at least the head of the ministry, must manage. And on the other hand, you put in the Constitution that he's only to supervise.
The future?
There's a lot of talk about streamlining and so on, and the sense that we derive from it is that there's a thrust to make the public service smaller by eliminating lower categories, contracting out work that people do at present in the public service. We are opposed to that.
I see a slimmed down, retrained, and reoriented civil service, hopefully freed up, given the right motivations and the ability to discipline their people so they can in fact operate a responsive system.
Slackers may be in for a shock.
Those people have to be weeded out. You can't have the taxpayer of the country paying for people who are idling, who are finding every reason in the book not to carry out a task, not even to reflect on the particular project that has been put before them, and who at the end of the month are the first in line to draw their salaries.
Performance becomes the criteria for reward and for promotion in our public service.
This is going to cause some pain. But if you're going to reach success, you have to endure some pain.
What kind of pain?
Well, some people may find themselves drummed out of the service for inefficiency or whatever other cause, and others may remain in the service but simply won't rise, with or without trace.
Unfortunately, retrenchment may well be the catchword for 1993. But those in power must be aware that it is false economy to retrench without first putting into place safety networks, so that those who are laid off are redeployed, not displaced from society altogether. Mathur, TV6 News, with a special report.